It's
Hopefully
way more
it's
complicated
yeah.
than that.
It's more about feeling. It's not as solid as permutations and all right, so let me start with a little bit of history. So fonts have a very long history. Obviously, these humans have been writing for quite a long time. And according to my research, it's been since 100 BC since the first written form of language was used. But in more recent times, which probably more or less care about, would be Gutenberg. So Gutenberg invented the printing press. Thanks to him, we can actually have books that we don't read anymore.
You've got the digital swap.
Yeah, formatter's bug.
It was definitely not 1940 when we did that.
Yeah. Oh shoot! I'm sorry. I totally forgot the year they did that. Yes, it was 1940. A very long time ago.
All the things really fast.
The first book that he printed was the Bible. A little bit of it for interesting information. Then we had our first use of italic type in 1501. So it was like 14 something around there, or 1440. Probably something around there. Anyway, so we got italic type. It wasn't sans serif though. It was serif. Well, I'll put that in a second. Just here. So sans serif. Sans serif around the 1800s became widely used. Before then, it was serif fonts. I will show you more of those later. But sans serif came around the 1800s. Then our well-beloved Helvetica, which is the most widely used font in the world today, came around 1957. And they're just like, so 1990, Wingdings came about. This isn't even Wingdings. I couldn't even get it installed. I can't find it. It's like it's still like you have to pay for it. I'm like, oh, what? And the only thing I could find why it exists is to put graphics on dot matrix printers. That's about the only reason I could find that it actually existed. So don't ever use that. Or this is fantastic, by the way.
It was Wingdings first, then Zap Ding.
Yeah, all the dings and that one. Use this one recently.
Oh, the best one ever.
So 1994, a guy over at Microsoft got inspired by Microsoft Bob and the Dark Knight comic on his desk at the time. So he's like, okay, I'm going to create this font. It actually didn't even make it in at the right time. It was weird. It just kind of like snuck its way in, and now it's somehow still around. I've never used this ever.
Unless
Right,
you're about to
so-
install your team.
What's that?
What's that last one called so I can use
Useful terminology. As you can see a little bit around here, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can refer to, all the little pieces of the font. Don't care about those. There's just a couple you need. And the first one I'm talking about is leading. Leading or line height, or what else do people refer to it as? That's what those two. Okay, line height if you're talking about CSS, leading if you're talking about page layout. So this is leading. So you've got the lines at the baseline of each line of text. And points if you can guess which Gibson this comes from. And then, so the height between this baseline and this baseline, that is called leading, or line height in CSS. You want some breathing room when you use leading, or when you lay out large blocks of text. It's really easy on the eyes to read this as opposed to something that's more like that, something a little bit tighter. I've seen people go a lot tighter than that because they don't pay attention to it. Or like the CSS doesn't load a page correctly, you'll see like that. And leading is actually lead. When it was first invented, how they actually did it is they put lead in between the lines. There's no lead in between here, but you essentially take a block like this and you lay it in between. And if you want higher leading, you lay 2 blocks, or just get a fatter block, or if you want less, you take them out. The second one is kerning, or character spacing. By the way, leading and kerning in Keynote suck. Don't ever try to do it. This is horrible. So kerning, it's hard to see, but I got little red lines in between the characters here. So you got a lot of space here, you got a lot of space there. To most people, they don't actually notice this until you show something that looks a little bit better. And then it's like, oh, that's a lot easier to read than that. This is kind of a subtle example, but you can get the idea. The farther the characters are apart, the harder it is actually for your brain to read it. So if you can move it together visually, so lines kind of, they talk about feeling, so the lines feel like they flow with each other. And you can play this all day long, especially if you're doing logos. You do this stuff all the time. You're moving characters around, all sorts of stuff. So there's so many choices. I'm sorry for these slides. I just took screenshots of web pages. This is really low resolution. And it gets worse after this. Okay, so again, feeling. So you were asking, like, what fonts do you use for what? Well, that's hard. It's really hard to answer. So I found some examples. So if you look at like a serif font, I didn't explain that, I'm sorry. So a serif font, let's just talk about here. A serif font has these little lips on the edges of the descenders and the ascenders and all that kind of stuff. It's these little edges to it. That's a serif font. A sans serif font, just do that real quick, is like this. There's no little lips or anything on it. That's a sans serif. No serif. That's a sans serif. Okay, so a serif font like this usually kind of gives you a feeling of traditional, of solidified. I don't know why, but it just kind of does. So, yeah, old world. So this kind of feels like a publication in a sense. Well, one, because it's kind of laid out that way, but also because of font. If we change it to a font like this, where it's big and it's italic, it's really thin, it wouldn't have that same feeling. But this page kind of gives you the feeling of movement, fast. Well, you got italics for one. You've got thin text. I don't want this to sound bad, but thinner text can usually speak more to women. So if you're doing like a catalog with clothing, you want to appeal to the sexy side of things, you want to look at thinner fonts, more classy. Don't go too scripty, but like you got a big, don't do that. Unless you're doing some crazy perfume. So this gives you a feeling of fast. And one thing I want to point out here is big text. Really, like if you're going to design something and you want something to stick out, you want someone to read it, put in big text, they're going to read it. Their brain is going to read it, they don't have a choice. The smaller it is, well, you can't see it, you just ignore it. So don't do that. So this page, this is using sans serif fonts. It's all over the place. But again, it's a little bit thinner. They're using some nice, just different sizes for the headers, and a little bit bolder here, a little lighter here. Without the spaceship, it's more of a modern sort of feel. If you want modern, this probably most of us do because we're going to build web pages. So you probably want to use a sans serif font and this kind of stuff. Nice use of white space in this page too. So you want something retro. Okay, so now you can go with like a logo up here. It's got a little edge to it. It's a little scripty in a sense, so it feels older. Get big text, you want them to read it, big bold text. So the one thing I like about this page is it's not just, there's a lot of text here, but they're also using the blockout functionality here, like putting text to make it look like it's blocking something out. You can use whatever font you want, but if you just slap a font on a page, it's going to look boring. So you really kind of have to play with it, not just from the font side, but you have to play where it's going to lay on the page, how it's going to look, and where you place it, like this. But they could have just put workshop there and it just kind of blend in, you wouldn't see it. But now that you're surrounding each letter with something, it kind of stands out a little bit more. So it's not just the text. You really kind of want to play with it a little bit. And this one, big fonts again. But they're using a serif font here, but it doesn't feel classic. It doesn't feel traditional. Well, again, it's part of the design. It's brighter colors, bigger text, and it's got some rounding to it. You'll see a lot of fonts like this where it's big and bold, it's round, it feels more playful. So you can use this, I used this on phone case at one point actually. You can use this to appeal more to children, or the inner kid in all of us. This page, I have a problem with. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. It kind of looks okay at first, and then I sort of like, oh, this is awful, this is horrible. There's 7+ fonts on here. That doesn't even include the logo.
The logo has 7 fonts. At least.
So one thing you should never ever do, don't use more than 3 fonts. This kind of example slips in a little bit and kind of cheats because it feels a little bit more organized, but it's not really, because it's just so many fonts. Don't use more than 3 because it's hard. It's hard for you to read. It looks amateur, and just do it. Anyway, all right. This one. All right, so this feels solid, almost a little old school, a little professional. I'm gonna probably blame it all on that one right there. Again, it's a little scripty. It's not actually like sans serif, or it's not a serif font, but you know. Again, it's another example. And how you're laying it out, big, you know, I like the image. This is my portfolio, you know. I wouldn't do that for myself, but okay. All right, so some tips. Make it readable. I've been talking about big fonts. Like, as you notice, all my slides are huge, big fonts. You want to read them. Can you read that in the back? No? You know how many people do this all the time?
Yeah.
All the time? One thing that's important about this is next time you're driving down the freeway, there's what's called a 60-60 rule. Look at a billboard. You're going 60 miles an hour, you have about 60 seconds to see it. If you can't read it in that, you did it wrong. And I'm going to say that applies to web pages as well, for anything that you're going to design. You want them, you have to grab their attention in 60 seconds. Probably even less these days. So make what you want big, what you want them to read big. Again, 3 fonts max. This is hard to do in Keynote, so this is a horrible attempt. But anyway, you have a lot of fonts in one spot. It looks disjointed, it's hard to read.
Especially if you jam one next to each other.
Yeah. Anyone get this yet?
It's Pulp Fiction.
All right, look at the ones. Samuel Lipson.
Samuel Jackson Robinson.
Contracts. Okay,
Wasn't
so
swearing it.
do you actually read that? Is that hard to read?
Yes.
Okay, so again, you know, a mistake that a lot of people make is they'll put something, they'll try to be cool about it, and they'll take this cool image and they'll lay some text on it and they'll draw the opacity and it's like, oh, that looks awesome. No, you can't read it. Stop doing that. Creepy guy in the background. Or maybe you want to play with it a little bit. Like, this is a very forced example, but maybe you want to play with contrast a little bit. Maybe you want to have the text there, but you want to draw their eye towards a specific spot. It's really forced, but get artful with it. So the whole point of this is pick your font. That's going to take you a very long time. You have to go back and forth, play with this, play with that, change the character spacing or the kerning, whatever you want to call it, and you're going to hate it, and you're going to do it again, you're going to hate it, and you're going to do it again. You're going to spend a lot of time on your font choices as you're going to spend the entire design. If you're doing logos, it's a whole other story. It takes forever to do a logo, in my opinion, so I don't do it. But you get artful with it. This is all text. It's, you know, you do a lot of stuff in applied marketing. Obviously, the trees in the long example. And I wanted to play with this one. This is my end of my slide, but I want to say keep it simple. So I got a little fin down here. I can easily replace this with Calvin Klein and look like, you know, a high price ad. You know, you can do a lot. Anyway, that's my presentation.
I really liked your talk of when you showed all the mixed panel stuff. What analytics or any type of measures do you do to analyze how effective a font is?
Measure a font? I mean, outside of A/B testing, I'm not sure there's
A/B
much else
testing, I
you
don't
can
think
do.
that
But if you're going to be changing a font is probably going to affect the entire look of whatever you're trying to design. You're not going to throw a big bold font and a really thin font at the same time. So an A/B test might not be the best way to go. You might just need to take that back a step and really figure out what direction you need to go as a brand.
And I have a second question. Sorry, Albert. How often, or do you think there's a utility in printing off your web pages and looking them at paper? Or do you consider the web paper completely different mediums, so it's not necessarily?
I'm okay with it. You ask my girlfriend, she'll print it out.
All right.
Probably not enough for what time is left, but I was wondering if you could talk briefly about, you said 3 fonts max, which I think is a very good rule, maybe even 2, but fewer is better, but rules about mixing the fonts, because I mean I've seen people who only chose 2 or 3, but they looked horrible together. Like, you know,
I'd say
you want your
mix.
fonts to complement each other,
Yeah,
but like
that's the key point.
how do you know that they're actually, assuming you're brain dead as far as design, how do you
I don't
know?
answer for
like-
that. Or... Oh, thanks.
So, Alex, I was going to comment in general, but I learned the way that you kind of pick that up is that you have 1 study fonts, but if you want like a quick crash course, Folk School does a design course and it teaches you typography. And when that course, it talks about transitional fonts, slab fonts, what sans and sans serif fonts are, but really how do you understand the context they bring in just text, and then how do similar ones complement each other when you share this context. So it's much harder to explain than just like, just a one-off sentence for me, but also you could use Google Fonts. If you view the font itself on its own page, it shows you what other fonts are most often used with this font in the web. And so if you choose like a header font, it'll show you the body font that you could most likely pair it with. So that's a good way to get started, because then you can start to see how they share together.
That's a whole feeling that can't prove it. Yeah, I got one. Thank you.